former director of the USAID Office of Civilian Military Cooperation and author of Masters of Corruption: How the Federal Bureaucracy Sabotaged the Trump Presidency. Dr. Mark Moyar. Doctor, thank you so much for being here. Appreciate you. If you've worked in government like I have, like you have, you see waste and abuse all the time. What was it that made you say, enough is enough, I have to come forward?
Yes. I joined the first Trump administration in 2018, and I saw just what I saw was flagrant corruption, the most egregious being criminal conflict of interest, people using their jobs to, their government jobs to get business for then outside companies that they had financial stakes in. And I had come to the job believing that we needed to drain the swamp, as President Trump had said. And so, I assumed that I would get backing from others, and initially was told I would. But then when the corrupt people got their friends to make bogus allegations against me, people ran for cover. And even these top political appointees were scared of the bureaucracy, and particularly the security clearance bureaucracy, because that's why they came after me. They suspended my security clearance and conducted some sham investigations. And so I didn't really fully know what I was getting into, but the corruption there has been shocking for a long time. And it's only now, I think, we are finally really addressing it. And so it's very encouraging to see that.
I've worked with USAID personnel. I did when I was over in Iraq. Many of them do work that helps people in need. George W. Bush created PEPFAR, saved millions of lives in Africa. But there's also work underneath all of that that is nonsensical. It is a radical agenda, and as you say, there's also corruption. $2.5 million for EVs in Vietnam, $2 million for sex changes in Guatemala, $30 million to study AIDS among sex workers and transgender people in South Africa, $20 million for Sesame Street in Iraq, millions for tourism in Egypt. And I've also understood what you just said, and I've seen it firsthand. After you start making waves and you start pointing out waste or abuse of the system, they come after you. And talk to us a little bit more about some of the things that you saw happening at USAID with some specificity that really made you want to put your career at risk.
Yeah, well, there were a variety of attempts to defy or avoid White House scrutiny. One example that I came across, and this was a year and a half into the Trump administration, when I visited Africa, because we had fairly few political appointees at the time, I learned that the agency bureaucrats were stopping or preventing work with faith-based organizations based on a spurious interpretation of the Establishment Clause of the Constitution, which had been disproven in courts. And this was driven by a strong atheist element within the agency that was opposed, especially to religious views on LGBT agenda and abortion. So they were consciously trying to undercut and prevent work with faith-based organizations. So we eventually were able to put a stop to that. Yeah. Another example was that they were doing so-called humanitarian operations in Syria that dated back to the Obama time. And the White House and others didn't really know what was going on. This is a recurring problem. They hide things. So I was at a meeting, and they apparently didn't realize who I was. And so they talked about how Trump would probably not like these programs, so why don't we make sure that he never finds out about them? And I reported that. That also didn't go anywhere, which is another problematic sign, because we had, in the first term, we had Trump appointees who were too scared or didn't care enough to actually push the president's agenda.
Yeah, it's the bureaucracy believes that they are in this special protected class, that they are separate and apart from the entire system, including the president, who is the head of the executive branch in which they work. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has been a critic of the agency, sir, for some time. He spoke on the president's decision to drastically shrink USAID in its current capacity. Watch.
That every dollar we spend and every program we fund that will be aligned with the national interest of the United States. And USAID has a history of sort of ignoring that and deciding that they're somehow a global charity.
The State Department has now taken control of the agency, Doctor. Certain funding has been frozen. What else needs to be done here?
Yes, well, they also have tried to put the whole staff on leave. Now, there was a judge who suspended this order until next week. You know, I will say, having worked there, there are plenty of good people in the agency and some who are doing good work. So I do think you want to keep some of the staff. I think there is a very bad toxic element, and some of them were actually removed at the beginning when they suspended 60 people. And then also they went to the Office of Security, which handles security clearances, and the director, John Voorhees, tried to block them. They put him on leave. He's another big part of the problem. So they certainly need to remove the people who have been such a problem in the past. It tends to be people in more senior roles who are, you know, as you described, they think somehow they know better than the White House, and they know better than the American people who elected them. And this is, you know, unfortunately, a common bureaucratic mentality that we're going to have to wrestle with across the federal government, especially when you have a workforce that overwhelmingly voted for Kamala Harris in the last election.
Dr. Moyar, you know, when I worked in the federal government, I had, you know, X number of people who worked under me. Only a certain number of those folks actually worked, and I could have run my office a lot more efficiently with a lot less people. President Trump wants to slash this agency to the bone. What percentage of the budget and the workforce do you think could be cut while ensuring that the agency can continue consequential operations that advance U.S. interests?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think there's a lot of analysis going on in detail to get precise answers to that. I think in terms of the budget, probably the biggest area that you can save on is these indirect costs. Senator Joni Ernst has been talking about this. They charge these massive overhead fees that they then try to hide. So I think you could save, you know, perhaps close to, you know, half of what's being spent now.
Wow.
Again, we don't have visibility on this, so it's a little hard to be more precise. You know, the workforce, again, as you said, yeah, my experience is too that, you know, half the people do most of the work, and so, you know, you could certainly take something close to that. Now, the tricky part is, and hopefully they will, you know, get this figured out, but I've been in government before, it's not always easy to get rid of the bad people while keeping the good. So that's going to require a lot of attention to make sure they actually are figuring out who deserves to stay.
USA whistleblower Dr. Mark Moyar, thank you very much for your insights, and I'm sure we'll be checking back with you as this continues. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. Great to be with you.
Information. Truth is freedom. Is Newsmax. It's real news for real people.